Behind the scenes of The Chosen Season 6, there are whispers of events no one was ready for. Not the cast. Not the crew. Not even the loyal fans who believed they had seen everything this series had to offer. What was once a faith-based drama has now crossed a threshold, stepping into territory that feels almost too sacred to touch. From the very first days of filming, something unusual began to stir. Cast members arrived prepared for the physical exhaustion of long shoots and heavy costumes, but none of them were prepared for the invisible weight that pressed down on the set. It wasn't just another production. It was as if every step onto the filming ground carried a burden of history, of faith, of suffering that demanded respect. The crucifixion sequence, long anticipated by audiences, became more than a scene. It turned into an experience so raw, so haunting, that those who witnessed it whispered that it felt less like acting and more like reliving. The line between performance and reality began to blur. People watching didn't feel like they were seeing a reenactment. They felt like they were standing at the edge of Calvary itself. And then came the first shocking leaks. Small glimpses of the crucifixion scenes slipped out before they could be contained. Brief clips. Photos. Enough to leave viewers shaken. What they revealed was not polished drama but unfiltered agony, etched into faces and bodies that carried the scars of both artistry and faith. Those who saw them claimed they could feel the pain, not just watch it. From that moment, whispers spread quickly. This was no longer a production bound by cameras and scripts. This was transformation. This was suffering that felt holy. This was resurrection, expressed not through words on a page, but through wounds recreated and endured in silence. The decision to film in Italy was no accident. The crew didn't simply select a beautiful backdrop for ancient Jerusalem. They chose a hill that already carried cinematic memory. The very same soil that once bore witness to another famous depiction of the Passion was chosen again, not for spectacle, but for purpose. Dallas Jenkins, the showrunner, described it as returning to sacred ground. He explained that the soil had already tasted suffering on screen, and now it was time to revisit it, not as repetition, but as a new act of reverence. This wasn't a location. This was a battlefield of grief and glory. Every step on that hill felt heavy, as though the earth itself remembered. And when Jonathan Rumi, the actor portraying Jesus, first arrived there, something remarkable happened. He didn't rush into rehearsal. He didn't chat with crew or practice lines. Instead, he walked barefoot onto the hill, one step at a time. There were no cameras rolling. No commands being shouted. Just him, the cross, and silence. He brushed his fingers along the wood. He whispered words no one could hear. A prayer. A plea. A surrender. Those who watched him from a distance said it didn't look like preparation for a role. It looked like preparation for sacrifice. The atmosphere shifted. Crew members who were usually quick with jokes and chatter fell silent. Makeup artists, who typically filled the room with banter as they worked, treated their craft with an almost sacred reverence. Every bruise they painted onto Jonathan's back, every streak of blood they placed on his skin, was done as though it were a prayer. One veteran makeup artist later admitted, "We've worked on violent scenes before. But this felt like holy ground. We weren't just creating wounds. We were honoring them." But the true test had not even begun. Everyone knew the crucifixion sequence would be grueling. What they didn't expect was how much it would test their spirits, their convictions, and even their faith. The first day began with silence. Jonathan didn't start on the cross. He lay in the dirt beside it. His lips cracked. His body marked with wounds so realistic that extras on set gasped. Some even believed they were real injuries. One Roman soldier, tasked with holding him down, broke character, falling to his knees and whispering, "Forgive me." The boundary between role and reality collapsed. Jonathan's arms were stretched out, bound to the wood. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He simply breathed. Slow. Painful. Determined. And when a crew member tried to loosen the ropes cutting into his wrists, Jonathan whispered, "Let it be. If he endured it, then I can feel it." A gust of wind swept across the hilltop as the cross was raised. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sounds were the creaking of the wood and the grass bending in the breeze. Some on set claimed it felt like heaven itself paused to watch. The nailing of the cross was always going to be the hardest moment. The crew had prepared for it, but no amount of planning could soften the weight of what was about to unfold. The set was closed. Only a handful of people were allowed near the hill. Cameras stood ready, but no one dared speak. The air itself felt heavy, as though holding its breath. The actor playing the Roman soldier lifted the hammer. His hand shook. His eyes locked on Jonathan's outstretched wrist, and suddenly he froze. He couldn't bring himself to move. In a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't want to be the one who does this." Dallas Jenkins stepped closer, his tone gentle yet firm. "None of us want to. But someone has to show it. Not to glorify it. To honor it." The hammer rose again. And then it fell. The sound of iron striking wood thundered across the hillside. No flesh was pierced, but the impact was enough to shake those who heard it. The echo seemed to roll down the hill like a drumbeat of finality. Even though it was only performance, it felt devastating. Silence followed. No one shouted, "Cut." No one dared break the spell. Several crew members turned away, their shoulders shaking. A lighting technician sat behind a monitor, tears slipping down his cheeks. Even the birds that had been chirping earlier went still, as though creation itself mourned. Jonathan remained bound to the cross. He didn't ask to be helped down. His body trembled, his head tilted toward the sky. Real thorns still pressed into his skin. A trickle of blood slid down his face, catching the light of the sun. Someone whispered, "This doesn't feel like acting anymore. It feels like we're watching it happen for real." Even Dallas Jenkins couldn't hold it together. He stepped away, hiding behind a tent where his own sobs overtook him. Later, he admitted, "I felt like I was trespassing into something too sacred for me to touch. And yet I was responsible for telling it." The pain wasn't just on Jonathan's body. It was in everyone watching. The cast was not spared either. Elizabeth Tabish, who plays Mary Magdalene, wept uncontrollably, even though she wasn't scheduled to be in the scene. Vanessa Benavente, portraying Mother Mary, cried between takes, not because of what her role required, but because of what her heart felt. Extras collapsed in the dirt, whispering prayers of forgiveness. One said, "I knew it was acting, but I felt like I was mocking him. And I couldn't bear it." The crucifixion sequence was supposed to last a single day. Instead, it stretched into 3. Not because of technical delays, but because no one could emotionally sustain it. Every time the crown of thorns was pressed onto Jonathan's scalp, blood trickled down for real. A thorn lodged above his eye remained there for hours. And still, he never complained. He never asked for a break. He simply bore it. Between takes, he sat on the ground, crown still on his head, robe soaked in sweat and dust. His breaths came shallow. His lips moved as if whispering prayers. Once, a tear slid down his cheek, unnoticed by the cameras but caught by those nearby. For the people present, it was no longer about filming a show. It was about surviving an encounter with something too sacred to fully grasp. And then came the breaking point. The mocking of Jesus, drawn straight from the Gospels, became unbearable. An actor assigned to slap Jonathan in character froze. He couldn't bring himself to strike. Another, meant to laugh and jeer, collapsed in tears instead. Later, he confessed, "I knew I was just acting. But in that moment, I felt like I was mocking the real Christ. And my soul couldn't take it." The atmosphere of the set transformed. No one moved casually. Crew members stood frozen, forgetting their tasks. A production assistant, whose only job was to pass out bottles of water, admitted, "I couldn't move. I felt like I was trespassing on holy ground." What was meant to be fiction had become experience. The cast and crew were not pretending anymore. They were living trauma. They were standing at the edge of history, inside a moment that felt alive with both grief and glory. And yet, this was not the end. For the crucifixion was only part of the story. The resurrection still waited ahead. The crucifixion shook everyone on that hill, but the story was not finished. For as devastating as those days of filming had been, everyone knew that something greater still lingered ahead. If the crucifixion tore hearts apart, then the resurrection would test how much hope could be carried after so much suffering. Whispers spread among the cast and crew. Many spoke quietly, as though raising their voices would dishonor the sacred weight of what they had already endured. Some said it felt like the atmosphere itself was preparing them. As if the silence of heaven had been broken during the crucifixion, and now the earth was holding its breath again, waiting for dawn. Dallas Jenkins reflected on those moments, admitting that he had never felt filmmaking blur so completely into faith. "We weren't just telling a story," he said. "We were being asked to live through it." His words echoed the sentiment many felt, that The Chosen was no longer just a series. It was becoming something closer to an encounter, a passage through grief into glory. Jonathan Roumie carried the heaviest burden. His body bore the makeup of wounds, but it was his spirit that seemed to absorb the true weight. Crew members described watching him between takes, sitting quietly with the crown still on his head, whispering prayers they couldn't hear. To them, it was as if he wasn't simply preparing for a role. He was preparing his soul for resurrection. And still, the set itself carried its own mystery. The hilltop, once chosen for its cinematic history, became something different. Crew who had worked on dozens of productions said they had never experienced anything like it. Some described moments when time seemed to stop, when even the wind seemed to hush. One technician whispered that it felt like creation itself was waiting alongside them. The crucifixion scenes were finally completed, but the aftermath lingered. People left the set weeping. Some couldn't sleep for days. Others admitted they felt changed in ways they couldn't explain. It wasn't just acting, and it wasn't just filming. It was as if they had stepped inside history and touched something eternal. Elizabeth Tabish, who played Mary Magdalene, confessed that the weight of what she saw would never leave her. Vanessa Benavente, Mother Mary, carried the emotions of her role long after cameras stopped. Extras who had once signed on simply for background roles left speaking as though they had lived through an ancient story themselves. One whispered as he walked away from the set, "This wasn't just a scene. This was something sacred. Something alive." And that is what makes Season 6 different. This isn't merely entertainment. It isn't just a continuation of a beloved series. It is shaping into something that feels like holy ground captured on film. The crucifixion was only the beginning. The resurrection has yet to be revealed, and with it, a depth of hope and power that even the cast and crew are not fully ready for. Something is happening behind the scenes, something greater than anyone imagined. What started as a faith-based drama has become a living experience that pushes emotional, physical, and spiritual limits. These are not just performances. They are transformations. These are not just scenes. They are moments that leave a mark on the soul. And as the world waits for Season 6 to unfold, one truth rises above all the silence, the tears, and the trembling. No one is ready for what comes next.